Hey there! This video is for everyone who's learning English on their own, and this is a story of how I did it. Not entirely without help, but about 90% through my own effort. I'll also share some key insights about English and language learning in general on the way. Hope you found this video helpful, and let's dive in. When I was in the 3rd grade, so around the age of 7, 8, my mother's cousin came to visit us from another town and said that her daughter, who was 5 years older than me, was writing these English dictations in her school, and apparently they were so difficult, they were affecting her entire grade. And my mom panicked and photocopied my entire English textbook for that year on the eve of my summer holidays. Yes, it happens this way too in life, and made me copy 2 sentences from it over that summer every single day, sometimes with cajoling, sometimes with blackmail, sometimes with sweets. She said 2 sentences if I wasn't in the mood that day at all, and more if I felt like it. And this is our first lesson. 15 minutes every single day is better than 2 hours once a week. Language is a habit, and it requires constant repetition for you to internalize it and truly make it automatic. That same summer, my mother, who, by the way, didn't speak any English, bought me one of those children's books where basic vocabulary was separated into topics. Things like animals, weather, clothes, and so on. And every single day, either my mother or my grandmother would read me a chapter from that book and test how well I remembered the words. And before you ask, no, they didn't know how to read in English. The beauty of that little book was that next to every English word, they had a Ukrainian transcription. So whenever there is a will, there is a way. But yeah, with time, my vocabulary grew much bigger, and actually, my sentence writing duty turned into something that I did for pleasure too. This leads me to lesson number 2. You have to enrich your vocabulary constantly. Actually, my mom used to say that learning new words is like stringing beads together, one by one. Because a language teacher can correct your pronunciation or help you understand tricky grammar, but they cannot put new words in your head. It's your duty. See? And to be fair, I slacked off a lot that summer. But the things that I learned, especially in such an easy way, did make a difference. First day of 4th grade, and our new English teacher congratulated me in front of the entire class for knowing so much. And I hate to admit this, but it really stroked my ego and gave me motivation to study even more English. When I was 11 years old, we had a Peace Corps volunteer from the US, Miss Nicole, come to teach at my school for 2 years. And to start with, I was disappointed that she was not Hillary from Beverly Hills, because Nicole sounded way too French. Nonetheless, I was so eager to talk with her that I would literally stalk her between each class. I would run out of my classroom, sprint through the entire school, find her, and start talking or asking her random questions, until my English teacher pulled me to the side and said, "You know, Miss Nicole is a human too. She needs to have a break, have her lunch at the cafeteria, use bathroom occasionally, I was very upset about this, because it was already rare that we got to have a class with Miss Nicole. Every school in town wanted her, so we did not spend nearly as much time as we were supposed to. And finally, I remembered that I could already speak English before I met her. I don't remember the exact moment when I began to speak, but it's my theory that speaking comes easier to chatty people because they just cannot hold it in. Anyway, maybe there is some truth to that. The year I was in the 7th grade, our Ministry of Education decided to hold a national examination in different subjects for every single grade, and I remember panicking when I saw the content of an English exam. A year prior to that, my mom actually bought me a self-paced English course book, which had this little grammar addendum with different tenses, types of conditional sentences, all of that. So I basically sat down and studied all of it in one go. I wrote down and restructured every single rule from that booklet in my own notebook, and I remember writing a list of different present tenses. Present simple, present continuous, present perfect continuous, and then repeating the same thing for past and future. I absorbed grammar like a sponge, and actually English as a language started to make so much more sense after that. Which brings me to lesson number 3. Grammar is the backbone of everything. Now, words are important too. I'm not underestimating the importance of solid vocabulary, but you need grammar to be able to string those words together. I actually have a separate video on why grammar is more important than vocabulary for beginners. If you'd like to check it out, the link would be somewhere here on screen. But when it comes to a specific grammar book that I would recommend for English learners, it would be this one, Grammarway 4. Now, I have a free sample copy here that I got from one of the English competitions that I took part in. But basically, it's a fantastic book. The grammar rules are explained in painstaking detail. Numerous exercises, just lovely, super useful. Highly, highly recommend it. A year later, when I was in the 8th grade, I won a competition to participate in a free English language course offered by the best high school in my region, which also happened to be the 4th best in Ukraine. So once a month, on a Saturday, for an entire school year, 10 of the teenagers and I would go to our regional capital and spend 6 hours studying English. We would usually get a massive amount of homework for the month ahead, but what I noticed was that I actually retained much more when I not only filled in the blanks, but actually wrote down the entire exercises from our textbook, which might be the most important lesson of all. Write by hand as much as you can. Again, I have a separate video about different types of writing, how you can get into writing as a beginner and why it's so useful, so I highly recommend you check that out too. When I was in the 9th grade, I was preparing to take part in the national English competition here in Ukraine, and my English teacher was forcing me to write all these practice essays on a variety of topics, ranging from animal rights to the cyclical nature of history. And I'll be forever grateful to her, because not only did she correct my grammatical and orthographic mistakes, but she shredded my essays to absolute pieces to make sure that my arguments were airtight and logical, that I used the most appropriate and the best words to express my thoughts, and that the final product was strong and elegant, not only in its writing, but also in its thinking. And in my wildest dreams, I was only hoping to win 3rd place on the regional level, but I actually ended up winning 1st place at the regionals and then coming in 3rd on a national level. And actually, the older girls that I met at that competition taught me another important lesson about languages: the importance of having rich vocabulary. Now, those girls were true word collectors. They were searching obsessively for more advanced words that could express extremely nuanced shades of meaning. For example, instead of mere happy or grumpy, they would go for words like elated or cantankerous. This was the first time that I got a taste of words like that, and it changed something in me. I became a word collector myself, and apart from keeping my main vocabulary notebook, I began keeping separate lists of my favorite words, favorite expressions, and even quotes that I could later use for my other essays. I would actually learn some of these quotes by heart to later use them in an essay if a suitable topic came along. For example, I had these Virginia Woolf's quote for an essay about the growing phone addiction, and it ran something like, "Such a good morning's writing I'd planned, and wasted the cream of my brain on the telephone." I mean, mic drop. When I was in the 10th grade, I went to that fancy high school full-time, and even though we're only a bunch of 14, 15-year-olds, our teacher was already using advanced C1 level English textbook. This is Upstream. I absolutely love this series. I think it's a fantastic book in terms of vocabulary exercises, writing exercises, fantastic reading material. I highly, highly recommend it, and I'm a huge fan of this one. Plus, it smells really good. It was also the first time that I was using an actual book, not just a PDF, and I loved it. I loved the smell of it, I loved the feel of it, and I would usually take a friend and go to an English bookstore nearby just to smell books. I know it sounds weird, and I know that the sight of two 15-year-olds opening books on random pages and smelling them looked kind of weird to sales assistants, but I think they got used to us after a while and they never said anything. So yeah, I wanted to buy every single one of these, and for some reason it felt like I could reach through the smell to the entire English-speaking world. In 2014, when I was 15 years old, Russia occupied Crimea and began an armed conflict in Donbass, eastern Ukraine, which forced my family to flee to the capital overnight and obviously leave behind most of my English books, textbooks, dictionaries, notes, and so on. And for the first few years after this, our life was purely about survival, and this meant that studying English had to take a back seat. But luckily at that point I already had a strong C1 level, so I began to read almost exclusively in English, fiction, non-fiction, you name it. And a bit later, Turkish suddenly took a center stage in my life, but that's a different story. Right now, even though I sometimes feel like I know it better than my mother tongue, I continue to enhance my English, and I still find a lot of pleasure in it. I still get a rush of excitement when I discover a delicious new word, and I guess even 20 years later, I still can't get enough of it. I don't think I ever will. If you're learning English on your own, I hope that my story inspires you to keep going and to apply some of my advice. Because yes, learning a foreign language does require a lot of effort, but you can accelerate it, or at least make it much more enjoyable if you put your mind to it. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe for more language learning tips, and I'll see you in the next one.